Okay, so thank you for that explanation. And I read your profile on LinkedIn, and I could see that it's quite varied. You cover a lot of things. Um, so can you tell me about your technology stack and how it has evolved in the last year? Because I'm very interested in your story in the sense that, you know, your brick and mortar shops transforming into a digital first business. So could you talk to me a little bit about how that tech stack has evolved?
Certainly, in the retail program that I mentioned is probably the most, I guess, the one that's been on the biggest journey of them all. The digital space has remained fairly stagnant in terms of the technology stack fundamentally, although there's always progression around it. A lot of our focus has been on actually tweaking the performance of that side of things from a speed and reliability perspective more than anything else, instead of making wholesale changes. But as I say, on the retail side of things, we've been immersed in a project now for, it predates me joining the business in March last year, in fact, that's transforming that side completely away from the current very much localized solution that sits in our shops today, into a cloud-based platform that is able to be extended as much more simply than our current platforms are. As I mentioned earlier, the current systems are specific to either Ladbrokes or Coral. This mechanism, this platform that we're currently building is agnostic of each brand, so it's effectively for both Ladbrokes and Coral. And what it's really been for us is a real journey into building a cloud platform from scratch. Internally, a lot of our digital development is done by vendor partners. And this particular project has been completely in-house for a period of time. It was actually managed by a consultant, but managed still on the premises, I guess, in the office and nearshore. However, now it's completely in-housed and it's completely run by our own development teams from a project through to a coding perspective. It's been an interesting journey at the moment. A lot of the focus is on things like cost optimization, making sure that we're well architected, and a hell of a lot of the focus at the moment, and it's the case across the whole of the organisation in general, really is around performance and scalability. I think one of the main concerns for a business like ours, and it always will be, is the seasonality of our activity. Effectively, it's not just from a betting perspective. Obviously, you appreciate the fact that most bets are placed on a busy Saturday of football when there's a UK schedule on. Obviously, the peak for us is always the Grand National. That's always the key day for us, because it's both a mixture of football and the most famous horse race in the world. And really tailoring our systems to be highly performant in those scenarios and be able to service our customers in those scenarios is really, really key. But it's not just the betting, it's also a lot of the other sort of business processes that go on around those times, around things like settling bets and paying customers out for wins, etc. Also managing the sheer amount of data, really. If you think about an event, let's say a football match, Leeds versus Charlton or something like that. Within that, you've got several markets, which have got several outcomes, several selections. That's already hundreds and hundreds of bits of data to manage. But not only that, you've got in-play data as well, which is around all of the singular events that take place within a football match. Where the ball is on the pitch, so that we can present it on our visualizations. There's millions and millions of data points for every single event that we take in, that we manage. And really managing that data is probably more troublesome in some respects than managing the inflow of bets. And bets from a digital perspective is obviously a challenge, because it's open to the world and we can take in hundreds of thousands of bets per minute. On the retail side of things, it's less so, because a bet can only be placed as fast as a human that stands behind a counter can process it. But really, their management of the events and all the data around the events is really, really key for us. So having a good inroad into understanding our system's performance in that respect is really, really important to us.
Okay, so great. I'm going to come back to the modernization journey in a second, but I wanted to ask you, what are the most critical KPIs that you look after in this complexity and with all these peak times and the fact that you have to be on top of things in
Sure.
real time. It's obvious, but I think it's even more relevant for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, our key defining KPI will always be availability and uptime. From my perspective, at least, from a technology stack perspective.
Right.
Within that, in terms of measuring performance and what we can handle in terms of performance and making sure we're in line with what the business projections show. It's all about bets per minute, logins per minute, registrations per minute. And obviously, as I mentioned just there, dealing with the sheer number of events and in-play data that will come down effectively.
Right. Great. And I would assume you are monitoring all this with New Relic.
A mixture of things, really. I think availability and uptime predominantly is monitored by New Relic. Things around sort of logins and registrations and things like that, we often sort of balance the data between things like New Relic, which shows the throughput from a technical standpoint, but also through things like Google Analytics as well to understand customer behavior on our websites. From the on the retail side specifically, we get an awful lot more data out of New Relic and things like CloudWatch as well. From a technology standpoint, we understand the usage of the systems. There's less around things like logins and registrations on the retail side of things, because it's not always the case that a customer is registered, for example, in a store. But understanding the activity that sits within the tech stack related to the bets that are being taken, settlements, the events, etc., is what we measure on, and we do use New Relic for an awful lot of that stuff, particularly in terms of things like throughput, CPU, queue lengths, etc., that kind of thing.
Do you, I mean, I'm getting the hint that you do this, but is there a strong correlation between these tech KPIs and the business KPIs, even if you're measuring them in different places?
Yeah, there is, and we do that for a reason, I suppose, to stay true to what the product is really trying to deliver. Obviously, at a lower level, we have something I've kicked off within my team, particularly in the SRE space, is to really drill down into the next layer and actually create ourselves some technical KPIs for each of the different sort of areas that I look after, as it spans across a number of different bits of the stack, as it were, in the ecosystem. Each one has got its own challenges that we need to address. And really what I've been trying to build in is some lower level technical KPIs that we can measure against in terms of system performance and improvement. And New Relic, for example, is a great help in that, because you can see the trends of for months, in terms of data retention that we have on New Relic, to see how things like CPU are impacting the health of the services, how many errors we're getting, how many on the front end, for example, things like the JS error module, that really helps us to understand what the front end behavior is like, speed of loading pages and things like that we measure in New Relic is really, really useful to us as well.
In terms of your the journey that you've been going on, especially on those legacy applications that you're practically throwing to the garbage and rewriting, what are some key technologies that you've embraced, that you believe in?
I mean, for that particular project, we've embraced a lot of the cloud technologies, the AWS specifically in this case. That's been predominantly our first sort of shift into that. So understanding the sort of services that we can gain from off the back of AWS has been really interesting. Things like database options that we've had available to us, and gone down the route of Postgres, but we're always reviewing what we can do in that space. The DevOps space particularly, it's been quite interesting around sort of how we actually service the platform. And a lot of what we're investing time at the moment is around infrastructure as code, and Terraform specifically is something that we're exploring. We're also delving into the world of Kubernetes now as well. We're not by any means using it across the board. We've got it in one specific area of the business at the moment, but it's something we want to explore a lot more. And that world of containerization and managing containers is really, really interesting to us at the moment. Really, the goal at the moment is for myself in that space is delivering a framework for efficiency of delivery.
Right.
So we're working on our pipelines, and we use things like Jenkins, for example, but
Right.
working to make sure those things are really truly efficient. So the development organisations themselves who are responsible for delivering products can really bring product to market a lot faster than we currently do.
Right. Makes sense. And I guess that as you do this, your architecture is getting more complex by the minute. So you have to manage the whole thing. So you spoke about DevOps and SRE, and I was curious how the culture and your processes have shifted along this journey. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when I first joined the business, there wasn't an SRE team. There wasn't anybody doing the job that I was doing. It was a completely new role. One of the first things that I brought in was a real formalised, and it existed inside the independent areas of the business, but I created a centralised risk register process effectively, which really helped to drive forward visibility more than anything of particular issues. And by doing that, it kind of created the awareness of the fact that there was a challenge to be solved. Putting definitions on priority of certain issues that we were aware of, most of them were coming off the back of our experience in production and noticing things that were being pushed to the limit, maybe in production, or actually broken at certain times and caused incidents. Since then, over the last sort of 18 months or so, we've been able to transform that into something where we're now really good at proactively looking for these issues before they become production incidents, and really making sure that we address those technical risks, whether they be things around performance of the system and knowing that we're actually maybe nearing capacity on a particular service, or if we know we've got single points of failure within the architecture that need to be addressed, we address them. And not only that, what we've actually been able to do throughout that process is actually be immersed in projects and development upfront, so that we stop that risk from ever entering the platform. We've got new things that we're building. For example, this system. Yes, we came into it from an SRE perspective after the fact that it launched, but a lot of the functionality that's been developed since, and a lot of the way the cloud infrastructure has been built and how it's been designed in general, is what we've been immersed in and been involved in, which means that we've got a much better handle on how we manage, how we do technology, how we do design, how we think about how our systems need to be built.
Right.
I'd argue that before there was no rationalization to it. I put in place these pillars, for example. This is how I approach it.
I saw them.
Yeah. It really helped to sort of, and they're quite basic. There's a few sort of questions on there that it's not designed to be a be all and end all of what we need to do. There is certainly a lot more than that I do have spreadsheets worth of questions about in terms of checklists, but really what it was there was to basically just bring people's awareness up to, right, this is what we see as being reliable. You need to have monitoring. You need to think about the customer experience. You need to have the availability, the scalability. You need to have the knowledge sharing element of it as well. It's all in there, and it's really just sort of getting people to start thinking along the right lines, realistic. And how I've kind of sold it to people, I suppose, is the team's perspective is there was a lot of people that were increasingly frustrated that they were spending a lot of time fixing
errors.
But actually, that was it was a vicious cycle, because the more time they spent fixing issues, the less they were
time
on the cool and interesting, exciting product things that they wanted to do. And that was all back down to the fact that maybe not enough thinking had gone in up front around making sure that things were designed from a perspective that was going to be reliable and stable, etc., and performant. So really selling that to them, that if they build it right, not only are they building something cool, they're building it right first time, and because they're responsible for supporting it in production, they won't have to worry so much about things happening in production. So it won't interrupt the next iteration of what they're trying to develop, right? It will help them to focus on it in the future. And it's kind of just building that culture up where people understand that reliability is really, really important. And in fact, from our business performance in terms of the numbers, we've seen that ensuring that we stabilize the platforms, which we were able to really see the results of after only 6 months of our team existing inside the organization, the rewards from a business perspective has been
Have been
humongous to
huge.
keep the site up and running, and the customer loyalty and the voice of the customer, as we call it, in terms of customer feedback. We've seen the figures also dramatically increase in terms of satisfaction rates just through having a site that's speedy, that's performant, that's there and reliable when they want to place a bet effectively.
Do you remember at the top of your head how much, for example, the customer satisfaction has improved?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't like to state figures that I'm not sure of.
Okay, but you probably have it somewhere, which is a lot.
Get
A lot of our customers don't correlate these two things, so that's fantastic. So I wanted to ask you a couple other things, and then I can move on to the other stuff I wanted to discuss with you. Do you have any like aha moment where you realized the value that New Relic could bring to this whole transformation? Or you knew New Relic beforehand?
I did. I mean, I've always in my previous role before I joined Ladbrokes Coral, I was at Sky, and we used App Dynamics there. To be fair, we didn't use New Relic, but I was always aware of sort of the value of APM and all the sort of modules and infrastructure monitoring as well, and the dashboard capability. So I always kind of knew these kind of products. I hadn't used New Relic before. I think, really some of the stuff that I think most of the sort of the real moments where I've seen New Relic be really instrumental in helping us is there's a couple of different, not specific times, but a couple of different concepts. I think one has been really in speeding up the investigation process when we do have production issues that are going on. It's really easy to drill down into specific services. Even on the odd occasion myself, I've gone down as far as the thread profiling, for example, to understand where we've got particular issues and looking inside actually how code is being executed. And it's really useful in that kind of circumstance. And it's not necessarily just production. When we've had issues in stage or in non-prod or in dev, it's really handy. It's really handy for those kind of things. And the other element of it is, and at the moment, we've been speaking to Mitch, for example, about how we get a better handle on our spending in this particular element of New Relic. But the insights piece, we've had some specific projects go live where we've had a real requirement to not only monitor business but also monitor technical, performance due to the nature of the importance of those, and being able to really easily spin up new dashboards that can help our operational teams and support teams has been really invaluable to us on those occasions as well.
Right. Have you seen New Relic 1?
I got a brief demo of it. I don't think I was allowed to see it at the time. Last time that Mitch came over, actually.
Okay. Well, actually, now it's available. You can see it on your account. But the reason I mentioned this is because one of the new things coming with New Relic 1, a part of the fact that now it's really easy to navigate accounts and all that, is the fact that there's much more flexibility for the dashboarding. And you actually don't need to learn our NerdQL and all that, so it's like pretty much out of the box. So I'm not the technical expert on this, but I think it would be a good idea if you checked it out. Okay, has there been any moment in time, like when you have those big horse races in March, where you've seen the value demonstrated, or any issues that you've been able to fix with New Relic, particularly in those moments of truth?
I probably wouldn't say maybe fix in the moments of truth, but the visibility is really key. And because of the complexity of the systems, it's something where having that view into how things are actually coming to fruition, how the system is reacting to the things that people are doing. You build a system as per the business requirements, but the customers will always be doing something that you can't ever predict, right? The nature of human beings is that there'll be people that press a button 1,000 times out of rage or whatever it might be, and understanding how your system reacts to those kind of more human elements of it when it really comes to life. You can put your system through a performance run and you can see it expect to be performing as it should. But really, when it comes down to it and your customers are using it, how the system performs is really interesting, and getting the insight back out of how the things are. For example, from a Grand National perspective, we learn every year. We had a performance issue here, we need to improve on this, or we were coming close to the mark on this one, we need to improve on this. So we retrospectively use the data in that respect, as it were, to improve our system.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you for that. It's very interesting for me to learn how you're using our platform. So we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you 2 questions. One is if you're interested in sharing this story in the form of a case study. That would be simply a 40-minute interview, a little bit more formal with this one than this one, including maybe a couple of other people, one more technical for sure. That's one question. And I can give you more details about, I can send you an email actually with some examples of what I mean and how they are published on our website. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is if you're interested in speaking in FutureStack in London in October.
Definitely interested in both, certainly. From the case study perspective, I'll need to run that by my boss in terms of if it's something that we want to do. Definitely interested to hear more details on both of those things. Definitely interested to speak at those kind of events as well. It's not something I've done a lot of in the past, and I really want to make sure I get myself out there a little bit more. So.
Well, great. I get to help a lot of people like you to start doing that. So on the case study, I'll send you an email with the details and the process, so you can share that with your boss. And you can understand exactly how the case study would be used and the effort it would entail from your part, which is not very high. It's mostly on me. On FutureStack London, we are starting to plan the event. It's going to be a 400, 500 people event on October 16. And there will be different opportunities for some of our customers to speak. One of them is going to be, we'll have to see what you're interested in and the topics you're interested in, but there's going to be a technical and a business track in the afternoon. And I think you would be great to talk about DevOps. Maybe you can correct me, but it sounds like that's something that you would enjoy, or you can tell me what you would enjoy talking about. And so what we can do is we can do another call to start working on the content. I would support you in developing the content if you need it. Some customers want to, do their own presentation and they're used to this. With some other customers, I work with them to develop the presentation. And then it would be a 20-minute session. The format still needs to be defined, but it's also based on the topic you want to cover. Okay. And because we have some time before the event, it's something we could develop together if you're interested. Is your DevOps journey something you would be interested in covering?
Yeah, certainly. I actually I attended a small roundtable event last night, and it's quite eye-opening, sort of telling people about the story and how we've done DevOps since I've kind of grabbed the team and got my arms around it. And I think I'm definitely interested to share that more. Okay. I've got quite a good reaction, so I was quite happy to put something around that together.
Perfect. So I'm also interested because I'm not that versed into SRE, but I'm particularly interested in that relationship, how you understand that. Because I read that SRE is the purest form of DevOps. I think there's an interesting topic there, and something that I also want to follow up on with my content people, because we have done some content in the past around this figure. So that's just an idea we could develop. Again, if you accept, which I guess at a high level you're saying that you do, we can schedule another call and I can bring a couple of other folks and we can have a more structured conversation with that presentation in mind.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Will you be around in summer or are you disappearing?
I've got no plans to disappear in the summer.
Okay.
So yeah, I will be around. Yeah.
Good to know. So maybe what I'll do is in 2-3 weeks, I'll reach out to you once things are a little bit more advanced, and we can start that conversation. And in the meantime, I'll send you an email on the case study.
Okay, brilliant.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very, very much, Elliot. I look very much forward to working with you.
Similar. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend.
You too. You too.
Bye.